I never thought my own parents would be the ones to fire me. But there I was sitting in the same conference room, where ID spent 5 years building their company from scratch, listening to my dad explain why I wasn't a good financial fit anymore. The irony, I was the one who saved the company twice. ID brought in our biggest client, modernized operations, and cut costs by nearly 30%. But apparently, I was now too expensive to keep on payroll. Mom couldn't even look me in the eye. She just kept saying things like, "You'll find something else, honey. This is business, not personal." Except it was personal. Very personal. I devoted my 20s to helping them succeed, while my brother Ryan spent those same years partying and posting about his entrepreneur lifestyle. And yet when he suddenly decided to come back home and help the family, they created a position for him at my salary. A week later, my keycard stopped working. My desk was empty. My access to the company files was revoked. They didn't even give me severance. For a while, I was broken, angry, humiliated, and lost. But that humiliation didn't last. It transformed into something sharper. Because when I discovered why they really fired me, that they'd taken my contracts, my clients, and given them to Ryan to make him look competent, I made a decision. If they wanted to treat me like a disposable employee, I'd show them what it felt like to lose everything they built. For the first 2 weeks, I pretended to be broken. I answered my parents' texts with polite, hollow replies. I scrolled through my old email account and read threads where ID negotiated deals, calmed angry clients, and solved problems no one else could. Every message felt like a file being ripped out of me. But I was never as naive as they thought. ID spent the last 5 years learning the company's bones are supplier contacts, billing quirks, pain points clients never voiced aloud. I knew where the skeletons were. I knew the weak hinges in their operation. When you build something, you remember its cracks. So I started small, discreetly contacting a handful of clients I'd personally on board. Not to beg for sympathy. Not to guilt them to ask how they were doing. Genuinely to see if their problems were being fixed. Now that Ryan had the account, the answers were quiet alarms. Missed deadlines. Confused invoices. A supplier who suddenly stopped returning calls. The kind of bureaucratic rot that grows when someone who cares leaves and someone who inherited the title replaces them. Next, I quietly reached out to old colleagues, not to conspire, but to offer options. Some had never been paid on time since the leadership shuffle. Others were being forced into roles they had no training for. I listened. They needed a way out. Clients needed a steady hand. I needed leverage that wasn't just revenge, but a fixable product. The plan didn't feel elegant. It felt inevitable. I set up a company on my own. Nothing flashy, just a lean consultancy that could take on the messy transition projects the family business was botching. I used a name that wouldn't scream revenge. I rented a small co-working desk, created a clean website, and slowly, deliberately started taking on tiny contracts. I priced fairly. I delivered better. Word moved. At first, it was friends and freelancers, and 2 small clients. Then a third. Then the client Ryan had been handed as a test for his competence called me in private and said, "We don't trust them to handle this." I didn't celebrate. I offered a timeline and a promise. "We'll make this painless." They signed. Behind my confessor, I felt a funny split. Part of me loved watching systems heal under my hands, the same pride ID had at my old desk. Another part felt sick with something darker. The satisfaction of watching my parents' empire leak. Customers ID once fought to keep. Was I healing the industry and hurting my family? Or was I exacting a necessary correction? I told myself I was acting like a professional. I told myself this was about competence. But late at night, staring at the ceiling, I heard my mother's voice saying, "It's business, not personal." And I wondered which of us had lied to ourselves first, and I knew exactly how to do it. It didn't take long for the whispers to reach my parents. 3 months after I left, my dad called me out of the blue. His tone was forced casual, the kind of voice you use when you're trying not to show panic. "Hey, bud. Heard you've been doing some consulting work. That right?" I almost left. Consulting work. That's what they called the business they gutted me from. "Yeah," I said, simply. "Just helping a few old clients clean up the mess Ryan left behind." There was silence. Then the line clicked. He hung up. The next morning, one of their managers, who always liked me, texted, "They're freaking out. Ryan lost 2 accounts to your company this week. He is blaming everyone but himself." That was the moment I realized something crucial. They underestimated me completely. I wasn't just their ex-employee. I was their biggest threat. Because I didn't want to destroy them with scandals or lawsuits, I wanted to beat them the one way they couldn't dismiss, by being better. Still, the guilt lingered. I see my mom's ass face in my head. That mix of disappointment and pride she used to have when I achieved something big. It was gone now, replaced by betrayal. But then I think of how easily they replaced me with Ryan. How they took everything I built and gave it to someone who never earned it. And the guilt would fade. One night, Ryan showed up at my apartment reeking of whiskey. He pounded on the door until I opened it. "You think you're clever?" he slurred. "You think you can just steal what is ours?" "Ours?" I asked. "You mean the contracts I brought in, the clients I trained you on?" He shoved me hard for a second. I thought he was going to swing, but instead, he just glared and spat out, "Dad says you'll burn out. You always do. You don't have what it takes to run things long term." Then he stumbled down the hallway. That night, I barely slept. My blood boiled. Burnout, I'd been the only one keeping things afloat, while he played CEO for Instagram. So the next morning, I made my biggest move yet. I reached out to one of our oldest suppliers, a family-owned logistics firm that my dad had underpaid for years. I offered them a fair deal. No tricks, no ego. By the end of the week, they designed with me exclusively. It wasn't just business anymore. It was war, and I was finally winning the opening battles. Success is loud, and in my small hometown, it echoed faster than I expected. Within 6 months, my startup was no longer some side hustle. We had 10 employees, a proper office downtown, and a list of clients that used to be my parents' crown jewels. The funny thing, I wasn't even being aggressive. I just answered the phone when their customers called in frustration. Then came the counterstrike. It started subtle, a rumor that my company wasn't paying vendors. Then another whisper that I'd stolen proprietary data before leaving. Typical small-town smear tactics. But when I checked my inbox and found a cease and desist from my father's lawyer, my stomach dropped. They were suing me. The document accused me of misappropriation of intellectual property and client poaching. It was absurd. I built those relationships from scratch. But they had money, lawyers, and influence. I had hustle and a rented office with flickering lights. I didn't cry, though. I didn't even get angry. I laughed, a raw, exhausted laugh that scared my assistant. Let them come, I said. They just handed me proof of how desperate they are. Still facing a lawsuit from your own parents does something to your soul. It chips away at your sense of family. My mother sent me an email afterwards, short, cold business. Like, we're sorry it came to this. We tried to handle it privately. No love, no I miss you. Just corporate jargon. My attorney, a calm, gray-haired woman who'd seen 1,000 family feuds, told me quietly they're panicking. You're taking their lifeblood. And she was right. Their company was starting to buckle. Key staff were leaving. Clients were demanding refunds. Suppliers they de-squeezed for years were switching over to my side. Then one morning, my mom showed up at my office without warning, dressed perfectly, smile painted on, voice trembling. Sweetheart, she said, glancing around at the bustling team behind me. Can we talk privately? I led her into the conference room, my conference room, and waited. She hesitated and said softly, maybe we can make this right. Come back, we'll drop the lawsuit. We'll even give you part ownership again. I almost believed her. Almost, then I saw it. The small red light on her purse. A voice recorder. She wasn't here to reconcile. She was here to bait me into saying something that could be used in court. My chest went cold. I leaned back, smiled, and said, sure, Mom. But before we talk about business, can you turn off the recorder? Her face drained of color. That was the moment I realized something devastating. My parents didn't just want to win. They wanted to destroy me, even if it meant sacrificing everything we'd ever been as a family. And that was the moment I stopped fighting to prove myself. Now I was fighting to end them. After that meeting with my mother, something in me snapped. Not in a wild, screaming way, but in the quiet, surgical kind of way that changes everything. They wanted war, fine. I did give them war, but not the kind they were prepared for. I stopped reacting emotionally. No more rants, no more late-night arguments in my head. I became clinical, methodical. I studied them the way I used to study market trends, weaknesses, dependencies, and blind spots. And my parents had plenty. Their company had grown fast, but without adapting. The infrastructure was outdated, the contracts full of loopholes, and most of their long-term clients only stayed out of habit or loyalty. To me, I started exploiting that. Not illegally, not dishonestly, just strategically. I built a quiet network of people who'd been burned by then suppliers, former staff, even a few local investors who'd been ignored when Ryan took over. Together, we built something sustainable. Transparent. Modern. Everything my parents' company was T. Then I made my boldest move yet. I bought the warehouse they'd been renting from an old family friend. It was easy. They'd missed 2 lease payments, and the owner was tired of their excuses. One signature later, I owned the heart of their operations. When I called to inform them that their lease wouldn't be renewed, the silence on the other end was beautiful. My father finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. You think this is a game? I smiled. No, Dad. I think this is business. You taught me that, remember. He hung up without another word. 2 days later, Ryan posted a rant on LinkedIn, calling me a disloyal snake and accusing me of using family to climb the corporate ladder. It backfired spectacularly because in the comments, former employees flooded in to share their own stories of how ID treated them fairly, while the old company hadn't paid bonuses or respected boundaries. Overnight, their brand became toxic. But revenge didn't feel as sweet as I'd imagined. Late nights at the office, I'd sometimes catch myself staring at old family photos. My mom and dad smiling with me at the company's first ribbon cutting. We'd been proud then. United. Now, every win felt like carving away another piece of my own heart. Still, I couldn't stop. Not when I was this close. The final step was in motion, a quiet merger with one of their biggest competitors. If it went through, I'd control enough of the market to make their collapse inevitable. I didn't want to destroy my parents, but they left me no choice. And the day I signed that merger, I'd finally take back everything they'd stolen from me. And more got the morning of the merger. I woke up before sunrise. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, like it knew what was coming. I stood in front of the mirror, buttoning my shirt with steady hands, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like the wounded son who'd been betrayed. I felt like the man they'd taught to survive, the one who'd learned every trick they used, then mastered them. By 9 a.m., the deal was official. My small company had merged with Westmont Industries, the very competitor my parents feared most. Overnight, I went from being a local upstart to owning the majority stake in a firm that controlled nearly 70% of the regional supply chain. In simpler terms, everything my parents needed to stay afloat now ran through me at noon. The news hit. My phone buzzed non-stop texts, calls, LinkedIn tags, industry gossip. By 2 p.m., my father's company's stock value had plummeted. Clients pulled contracts. Suppliers demanded prepayment, and at 4:13 p.m., my mother called. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling, not from anger this time, but fear. "Because you made me," I said quietly. "You taught me that family doesn't matter in business. That money comes first. I just learned a lesson better than you did." She started crying softly, but there was something rehearsed about it. A pause, a sigh, as if she was waiting for me to say, "I regretted it." I didn't. Later that evening, I got an email from my dad. No greeting, no sign-off. Just one line: "You win. Congratulations." But it didn't feel like winning. I drove past their office that night, the one I used to unlock every morning. The parking lot was half empty. Through the glass, I could see Ryan pacing, phone glued to his ear, his face red with panic. My dad sat in the dark conference room, staring at spreadsheets like they could somehow undo the past 6 months. I thought I'd feel powerful seeing them crumble. Instead, all I felt was tired. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. The CEO of Westmont, a sharp, calm woman named Elaine, called me into her office. "Congratulations," she said, sliding a file across the desk. "You've proven yourself. But there is one thing you need to know." Inside the file was a stack of documents. At the top, a loan agreement. My parents' company had taken out a massive line of credit months earlier to stay afloat. The collateral, their house, and the loan holder, Westmont Industries. My merger hadn't just crippled them. It had automatically transferred that loan to me. If they defaulted, I'd own not only their business, but their home too. For the first time since this war began, I felt sick. Revenge had been satisfying in theory, but holding the power to make my parents homeless, that was something else entirely. That night, I sat in my car with the file on my lap and a headache that felt like a fist. The moon glared off the roof of Westmont like an accusation. Owning their loan meant owning their fate. I could foreclose. I could hand them everything they'd taken from me back in a way that would be unmistakable. Eviction papers, final notices. The slow, the humiliating collapse of a life they'd built. And yet, when I pictured my mother folding laundry in the house where I'd learned to ride a bike, or my dad watering the same hydrangeas, every June the triumph tasted hollow. The idea of them on the street felt less like vengeance and more like cruelty. I had imagined a face-off, a lesson delivered with cold efficiency. I hadn't imagined vultures in suits picking through the pieces, or neighbors whispering, or my brother staring at an empty mailbox. And finally understanding what loss meant, I kept thinking of the way my mother had begged, not for the company, but for family. Even in the recording she'd hidden on her purse, there had been a flinch that wasn't acting. Somewhere in the guilt and greed tangle, there was still a woman who had once stood at my graduation and cried because she was proud, not because she was calculating. The next morning I called Elaine at Westmont. Her voicemail was crisp and efficient. "You have until Friday to decide what you will do with the collateral," as if life could be folded into a deadline. I started running numbers. Legal fees versus the moral cost. How much would people hate me? How many clients would walk away because they didn't want to be associated with a man who'd taken his parents' house? Could I live with that kind of victory? I also spoke quietly, carefully, to a few old friends who worked under my parents. None of them offered advice. They offered perspective. "You rebuild, you don't ruin." One said, "You make it so they can't hurt people anymore, but you don't turn into what you fought." By the time Friday rolled around, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called my parents and asked them to come to dinner. No lawyers, no cameras, no witnesses. Just the four of us in the old kitchen, where birthdays had been cheap and loud and real. I wanted to see them as who they'd been before, the suits and the ledgers, not who they'd become when they chose to fire me. When they arrived, hands trembled, eyes cautious. My father kept glancing at the framed company photo on my wall. My mother carried herself like armor. I served them pasta like my grandmother used to make. Nothing extravagant, but familiar. We talked for hours. Not about stock or leases. About small things, the brand of cereal my sister liked. The song that always played at my dad's office. The way my mom would hum while she folded towels. Then slowly the conversation slid into the new reality. I told them plainly that I had the power to foreclose, and that the file in the drawer meant their house, their security, and everything they'd known could be taken. I watched their faces blanch, watched a lifetime of pride crack into quiet fear. Then I told them what I planned to do instead. I would not take the house. I would restructure the loan. Fair terms, realistic payment schedules. Oversight to prevent the mismanagement that had led us here. They would sign professional guarantees that protected my new company and the suppliers they'd wronged. And Ryan would have to step down from any leadership role until he could prove competence under an independent board. No theatrics, no revenge. Just conditions that kept people safe and prevented repeat abuse. They listened. I don't know if they heard the mercy or the leverage in equal measure. Maybe it was both. Maybe what I offered was a different kind of victory, one that cost them dignity but spared them destitution. That night, I slept in my childhood room for old reasons and new ones. I had won without ruining them, but the price wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in a quiet, complicated ache, an ache that would remind me every day. Power without compassion is still hollow. And that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to stop being your worst self. That the dinner didn't fix us. It didn't magically erase years of betrayal, lies, or bitterness, but it cracked something open that had been sealed shut for too long. For the first time since they fired me, my parents looked human again. Not executives, not adversaries, just two aging people who made desperate, selfish choices and were now watching their empire crumble in their hands. My father stayed behind after my mother went to bed. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at his untouched glass of whiskey. "You remind me too much of myself," he said quietly. "That's the problem I didn't answer." He sighed, rubbed his temples. "When you started showing talent, I thought it was pride I felt. But it was fear. Fear that you'd outgrow me, that you'd prove you were better. So I cut you down before you could." It was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. "I didn't want to ruin you, Dad. I said I just wanted you to see me." He nodded slowly. "You did. Now I see everything. We didn't hug. We didn't reconcile in some cinematic burst of emotion. But when he stood to leave, he put a hand on my shoulder, heavy, trembling. Real, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a challenge. It felt like an acknowledgement. The following weeks were chaos. Lawyers redrafted contracts. Westmont finalized the oversight structure. And the press had a field day with headlines like, "Son saves failing family empire after being fired by parents." I hated the word saves. It made me sound noble when the truth was much messy. I hadn't saved them. I dismantled them and rebuilt only what I could live with. Mom called often, mostly to ask how to handle employees or suppliers. She tried to sound professional, but there was warmth sneaking back into her tone. Sometimes she'd slip and call me sweetheart again before quickly correcting herself. Ryan, on the other hand, disappeared. Rumors said he moved to Florida, maybe started some luxury lifestyle brand. I didn't chase him for the first time. I didn't need to prove anything to him or to anyone. But peace didn't come easy. Even after everything settled, I'd wake at 3 a.m. with that same restless energy, half expecting another betrayal. Another headline, another knock at the door. Until one afternoon, a letter arrived from my father. No email, no lawyer. Just pen on paper, his handwriting jagged, but firm. "You were right to fight back. I was wrong to think love and business could ever mix without consequences. But you taught me something. Legacy isn't about ownership. It's about what survives after pride dies. Whatever you build next, make it clean. Don't become me." I read that letter a dozen times. Each word felt like an unspoken apology, the kind he'd never managed to say aloud. I didn't cry, I just folded it carefully and tucked it into my desk drawer right next to the file that could have taken everything from them. Because even though I despaired them, I kept the file not as leverage, as a reminder that mercy is a choice you make every single day. And sometimes that choice is what separates you from the people who made you bleed. Months passed. The chaos that had once consumed my life faded into a strange, quiet normal. No lawsuits. No board meetings filled with tension. No reporters camped outside the office. Just silence. I spent years dreaming of that silence, thinking it would feel like peace. But it didn't. It felt empty, like standing on a battlefield after the smoke clears and realizing you've won, but there is no one left to celebrate with. My parents' company, or what remained of it, operated under Westmont's oversight. Now my father had officially retired. My mother worked part-time as a consultant. It was technically still theirs, but without their control, it had become something else entirely, a careful corporate machine stripped of heart. And yet they were surviving. I'd visit occasionally, under the pretense of monitoring the transition. The first few times, employees stared at me like I was a ghost, a prodigal son who returned not to destroy, but to observe. I kept my tone professional, polite, distant. Then one afternoon, I saw something that caught me off guard. My mom standing by the break room, laughing with two interns over spilled coffee. The sound was small, genuine. The same laugh she had when I was a kid, knocked over flour while baking. For a brief second, the years between us vanished. Later that evening, my father called. "Your mother is happier than I've seen her in years," he said. "She says the place feels lighter. Maybe we needed to lose it all to remember who we were." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to be happy for them. But another part of me, the part that had fought and bled to get here, didn't he trust the calm? Then came the question I'd been dreading. "We're thinking of starting something smaller," he said, "a boutique firm. Something manageable. We'd like your guidance. Maybe even your partnership." The silence that followed stretched forever. I could hear the hope in his voice, the quiet plea of a man who wanted to rebuild something with his son, not as boss and employee, but as equals. But I also heard the warning in my own heart. Every time we mixed family and business, something broke. Trust, love, peace. "I don't think I can," I finally said. "Not because I don't care, but because I do. If we work together again, we'll destroy each other." He didn't argue. He just sighed. "Then promise me one thing," he said softly. "Build something that makes you proud, not something that proves you were right." After we hung up, I sat in my office staring at the city lights. The empire ID built the revenge, the victories, the carefully measured power. All of it suddenly looked small compared to what he just said. For the first time, I understood power had never been the goal. Freedom was, so I made my final decision. I sold my shares in Westmont, walked away, started over clean, unentangled. No family, no debts, no ghosts. And as I signed the final document, I felt something lift from my chest. It wasn't a triumph. It wasn't a grief. It was released. Walking out of the office for the last time, I felt lighter than I had in years. The city hummed around me, car horns, distant sirens, street lights flickering, all ordinary, all alive. And for the first time, I felt ordinary too. I didn't. He looked back at the glass towers that had once symbolized power, revenge, and betrayal. I didn't need to the victories, the lawsuits, the quiet smolder of my parents' empire, crumbling behind me. They had taught me everything I needed to know. The past few years had been a war. 1D built, destroyed, measured, and judged. ID held the power to ruin my family completely, and I chose mercy. Not because it was easy, not because I forgave them entirely, but because I realized that holding on to vengeance only traps you in someone else's shadow. I called my mother later that evening. Her voice trembled, a mixture of relief and caution. "You really let us live," she said quietly. "I did," I replied. "And I'm not letting anyone else, including me, get hurt by this again. I have to live my own life now." She didn't respond for a long time. Then she whispered, "We're proud of you in ways you'll never know." I hung up feeling a strange mix of warmth and distance. Pride from your parents isn't always about money or business. Sometimes it's about the choices you make when no one is watching. I moved to a new city, started a small consultancy from scratch, this time fully my own. No family ties, no old debts, no lingering grudges, just clean work and honest effort. Clients respected the transparency. Colleagues respected the fairness. And slowly, I built something that wasn't just a company. It was peace. Every now and then, I'd see an article about my parents' company. It was surviving leaner, humbler yet functional. Ryan's name appeared occasionally, attached to small projects, his brashness toned down, and my parents. They were learning, struggling, and somehow living. The irony wasn't he lost on me. In sparing them, I defied myself. The war that had started with betrayal ended with clarity. I learned something profound. Power and revenge are intoxicating, but the real strength lies in choosing restraint, in finding closure without annihilation. You can win the game and still be human. And for the first time in years, I smiled not out of triumph, not out of relief, but simply because I was finally free. Freedom. That was the lesson, the victory, the story.